The sound of the final buzzer still echoed in my ears as I watched Chris storm off the court, his jersey soaked with sweat and his face twisted with frustration. We had lost by 12 points, crushing defeat that would likely cost us our spot in the regional championships. The gymnasium slowly emptied as disappointed fans filed out, their voices a low murmur of consolation and criticism. I sat on the bench for a moment, my own disappointment weighing heavy in my chest. As team captain, I felt responsible for our performance. Tonight, my shots had been off, my passes sloppy, and I had failed to rally the team when we needed it most. But watching Chris disappear into the tunnel toward the locker rooms, I knew his pain ran deeper than mine. Basketball wasn't just a sport to him, it was everything. Chris Martinez had been my best friend since our freshman year at State University. We had met during tryouts. Two kids from different backgrounds who shared an obsession with the game. While I came from a middle-class family in the suburbs, Chris had grown up in a rough neighborhood where basketball was his ticket out. Every game mattered to him in a way that sometimes scared me with its intensity. I finally stood up from the bench, grabbed my water bottle, and headed toward the locker room. The hallway was dimly lit, and I could hear the distant sound of lockers slamming. When I pushed open the heavy door, I found Chris sitting alone on one of the benches, his head in his hands, still in his uniform. "Chris," I said softly, my voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "Hey man, you okay?" He didn't look up, his shoulders were shaking slightly, and I realized he might be crying. In the 3 years I had known him, I had never seen Chris cry. He was the toughest person I knew, someone who had faced down bigger players without flinching, who had played through injuries that would have sidelined others for weeks. I walked over and sat down next to him on the bench. Silence stretched between us, filled only with the sound of our breathing and the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. I wanted to say something to make it better, but I knew from experience that Chris needed time to process his emotions before he was ready to talk. "We should have won that game," he finally said, his voice muffled by his hands. "I missed 3 free throws in the fourth quarter." 3? What kind of player misses 3 free throws when his team needs him most? The kind of player who is human," I replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Everyone has off nights, Chris. Even the pros miss free throws sometimes." He lifted his head and looked at me, his dark eyes red-rimmed and intense. "You don't get it, Daniel. This isn't just about tonight. I've been off my game for weeks now. Coach is starting to notice. The scouts who were interested in me are probably crossing my name off their lists as we speak." I studied his face, nodding the stress lines that hadn't been there at the beginning of the season. Chris had always been intense about basketball, but lately he seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. His usual confidence had been replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "What is really going on?" I asked. "And don't tell me it is just about basketball. I've known you for 3 years, and I can tell when something else is eating at you." Chris stood up abruptly and began packing the small space between the lockers. His movements were agitated, almost frantic. He kept running his hands through his dark hair, a nervous habit I had noticed becoming more frequent lately. "You want to know what is wrong?" he said, his voice rising. "You really want to know?" I nodded, though something in his tone made me nervous. There was an edge to it that I had never heard before, something raw and desperate. Chris stopped packing and turned to face me. For a moment he just stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. Then, without warning, he crossed the distance between us in 2 quick strides and grabbed me by the shoulders, pushing me back against the lockers. The metal was cold against my back, and I could feel the combination locks digging into my shoulder blades. "Chris, what are you?" "Shut up," he said. But there was no real anger in his voice. Instead, there was something that sounded almost like pain. "Just shut up for a minute and let me say this." His face was inches from mine, and I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could smell the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with sweat. My heart was racing, though I wasn't sure if it Was from surprise or something else. Entirely, I can't concentrate on basketball anymore, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't focus on anything because all I can think about is you. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I stared at him, my mind struggling to process his words. Chris, I am in love with you, Daniel, he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I've been in love with you for months, maybe longer, and it is driving me crazy. Because I know you don't feel the same way. I know you're not. I know you don't think about guys that way. The locker room fell silent except for the sound of our breathing. Chris's hands were still on my shoulders and I could feel them trembling slightly. His confession hung in the air between us like something fragile and dangerous. I had always known that Chris was different from our other teammates. While they talked constantly about girls and dating, Chris rarely participated in those conversations. I had assumed he was just more private about his personal life, or maybe too focused on basketball to think about relationships. It had never occurred to me that he might be gay, let alone that he might have feelings for me. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized that the signs had been there all along. The way he always found excuses to spend time with me outside of practice, the way he seemed to light up when I walked into a room, the way he had never dated anyone in the time I had known him, despite being attractive enough to have his pick of interested girls. Chris, I said softly, my voice, I had no idea. He let go of my shoulders and took a step back, his face flushing with embarrassment. Of course you didn't. Why would you? I've been trying so hard to hide it that I've probably been acting like a complete idiot. I pushed myself away from the lockers and took a step toward him. You haven't been acting like an idiot. You've been acting like someone who is scared and confused, which is completely understandable. Scared and confused, he repeated with a bitter laugh. That is one way to put it. Try terrified and completely lost. I reached out and touched his arm and he flinched slightly at the contact. Talk to me, I said. Help me understand what you're going through. Chris sat down heavily on the bench again, his head in his hands. I never wanted to be gay, Daniel. Do you know how hard it is to grow up in my neighborhood and be different? Do you know what guys like my brothers would do if they knew basketball was supposed to be my way out, my chance at a normal life? And now I can't even do that right because I'm too busy thinking about you. The pain in his voice was almost unbearable to hear. I sat down next to him again, close enough that our knees were touching. There is nothing wrong with being gay, Chris, and there is definitely nothing wrong with having feelings for someone. Easy for you to say, he muttered. You don't have to worry about your family downing you or your teammates treating you like a freak. You're right, I said. I don't have to worry about those things, but I do worry about you. I worry about my best friend who has been carrying this burden all by himself. Chris looked up at me and I could see the vulnerability in his eyes. Best friend, he said quietly, that is all I'll ever be to you, isn't it? The question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on processing his revelation and trying to be supportive that I hadn't really examined my own feelings. But as I looked at Chris, really looked at him, I felt something shift inside my chest. I had always been attracted to women. I had dated several girls throughout high school and college. Though none of those relationships had ever felt particularly meaningful, I had assumed that was just because I hadn't met the right person yet. But sitting here with Chris, feeling the intensity of his gaze and the warmth of his body next to mine, I wondered if maybe I had been looking in the wrong direction all along. I don't know, I said honestly. I've never thought about another guy that way before, but I've also never had another guy tell me he was in love with me. Something flickered in Chris's eyes. Hope maybe, or fear. What are you saying? I'm saying that I care about you more than anyone else in my life. I'm saying that when you're hurting, I hurt too. I'm saying that maybe the reason none of my relationships with girls have worked out is because I was looking for something I didn't understand. Chris was staring at me intently as if he was trying to read my thoughts. Daniel, please don't say things you don't mean just to make me feel better. I can handle rejection, but I can't Handle false hope. I turned to face him fully, our knees bumping together. I'm not saying anything I don't mean, I'm trying to be honest with you, which is what you deserve after being brave enough to tell me how you feel. The silence stretched between us again, but this time it felt different, less tense, more expectant. I could feel my heart beating faster as I looked at Chris's face, nodding the way his lips were slightly parted, the way his eyes kept darting down to my mouth and then back up to my eyes. Can I ask you something? I said. Anything. How long have you known about yourself? I mean, Chris was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. I think I've always known deep down, but I didn't admit it to myself until high school. There was this guy in my English class, Marcus. He was smart and funny and kind, and I found myself thinking about him all the time. At first I told myself I just wanted to be friends with him, but then I started having dreams about him, and I couldn't deny it anymore. Did you ever tell him how you felt? God. No, Chris said with a shake of his head. Marcus was straight and he had a girlfriend. Besides, I was too terrified of what would happen if anyone found out, so I just suffered in silence and tried to convince myself it was just a phase. But it wasn't a phase. No, it wasn't. And then I came to college and met you, and everything got so much more complicated. I felt a flutter in my stomach at his words. When did you realize you had feelings for me? Chris smiled slightly, the first genuine smile I had seen from him all evening. Do you remember the first time we played one-on-one? It was during our sophomore year, right after spring break. You had gotten a haircut and you were wearing that red tank top that made your eyes look incredible. I did remember that day. We had spent hours on the outdoor court, playing until the sun went down and the automatic lights came on. It had been one of those perfect spring evenings, when the air was warm but not humid and everything felt possible. You were trash talking me the entire time, I said, smiling at the memory. You said my jump shot looked like I was throwing a medicine ball. I was trying to distract myself, Chris admitted, because every time you smiled at me I felt like I was going to pass out, and when you took your shirt off because you were getting too hot, I thought I might actually die. I felt my cheeks getting warm as I remembered that evening. I had been completely oblivious to Chris's internal struggle, focused only on the game and the easy camaraderie between us. I had no idea you were going through all of that. I got pretty good at hiding it. Maybe too good. I started avoiding situations where we might be alone together, which is why I've been weird lately. I was trying to protect myself, but I think I was just making everything worse. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Chris's recent distance, his decreased performance on the court, his moodiness, it all made sense now. He had been fighting a battle with himself, and it had been affecting every aspect of his life. I'm sorry, I said. I'm sorry you felt like you had to go through this alone. It is not your fault, Daniel. You can't help how you feel any more than I can help how I feel. I reached out and took his hand, intertwining our fingers. His hand was larger than mine, calloused from years of handling basketballs, but it felt right somehow. Maybe we should stop talking about what we can't help and start talking about what we can. Chris looked down at our joined hands, and I could see the conflict playing out across his face. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe we figure this out together. I'm suggesting that maybe I've been blind to something that has been right in front of me for 3 years. And if we try this and it doesn't work out, if you realize you're not actually attracted to guys and things get weird between us, I can't lose you as a friend. Daniel, you're the most important person in my life. I squeezed his hand gently. You're not going to lose me no matter what happens between us romantically. You're stuck with me as a friend, but I think we owe it to ourselves to explore this, don't you? Chris was quiet for a long moment, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his head. Finally, he looked up at me with a mixture of hope and terror in his eyes. Are you sure about this? Because once we cross this line, we can't go back. I'm sure, I said, and as the words left my mouth, I realized I meant them completely. I'm more sure about this than I've been about anything in a long time. Chris's face broke into a slow smile and suddenly he looked like the confident, charismatic person I had fallen in friend love with 3 years ago. So what happens now? I felt my own smile spreading across my face. Now we take things one day at a time and see where this leads us. Before I could say anything else, Chris leaned forward and kissed me softly on the lips. It was gentle and tentative, nothing like the aggressive passion I might have expected from someone with his fiery personality. Instead, it felt like a question, like he was asking permission to continue. I answered by kissing him back, my free hand coming up to cup his cheek. His skin was warm and slightly rough with 500 shadow, so different from kissing a girl but somehow exactly right. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing heavily. Wow, I said softly. Good wow or bad wow? Chris asked, voice uncertain. Definitely good wow, I assured him. Really, really good wow. Chris laughed and the sound was lighter than anything I had heard from him in weeks. I can't believe this is actually happening. I've imagined this moment so many times, but I never thought it would actually happen. What did you imagine? I asked, genuinely curious. Chris's cheek re-ended slightly. I imagined that you would kiss me back, obviously, but I also imagined that you would tell me you felt the same way, that maybe you had been struggling with the same feelings I think maybe I was struggling with those feelings, I said slowly. I just didn't recognize them for what they were. Looking back, there were definitely times when I felt something more than friendship for you, but I always explained it away as just really caring about you as a friend. Like when I thought about it for a moment, like last semester when you got that concussion during the game against Tech. I was so scared when you didn't get up right away, and when they took you to the hospital, I couldn't focus on anything else until I knew you were okay. I sat in that waiting room for 6 hours, even though the doctor said you'd be fine. Chris smiled softly. I remember that you were there when I woke up, and I remember thinking that I couldn't imagine my life without you in it, not just as a teammate or even as a friend, but as something more essential than that. Why didn't you ever say anything? I shrugged, because I didn't understand what I was feeling and because I assumed you were straight. It never occurred to me that you might be going through the same thing I was. Chris leaned back against the lockers, pulling me with him so that we were sitting side by side with our shoulders touching. So what happens when we leave this locker room? Do we tell people? Do we keep it secret? Do we pretend this never happened? We definitely don't pretend this never happened, I said firmly. As for the rest of it, I think we take it slow and figure it out as we go. Maybe we start by just spending time together as more than friends and see how it feels. I'd like that, Chris said. I'd like that a lot. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, just enjoying the feeling of being close to each other without the weight of unspoken secrets between us. I was amazed at how natural it felt to be holding his hand, how right it seemed to have his shoulder pressed against mine. Chris, I said eventually, yeah, thank you for being brave enough to tell me how you felt. I know it couldn't have been easy. It was terrifying, he admitted, but also kind of liberating. I've been carrying this secret for so long that I forgot what it felt like not to be hiding something. You don't have to hide anything from me anymore, I promised. We're in this together now. Chris turned to look at me, and the expression in his eyes was so tender, it made my chest ache. I love you, Daniel. I know it is too soon to say that in this new context, but I need you to know that my feelings for you go way beyond physical attraction. I love your kindness and your sense of humor and the way you always try to see the best in people. I love how you make me want to be a better person. I felt tears prick at my eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion in his voice. I love you too, Chris, maybe not in exactly the same way yet, but I love you enough to want to explore what this could be between us. Chris kissed me again, and this time there was more confidence in it, more certainty. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine and smiled. I can't believe we're doing this, he said. Neither can I replied, but I'm glad we are. We stayed in the locker room for another hour talking About everything and nothing stealing. Kisses when the mood struck us and slowly getting used to this new dynamic between us when we finally left. Walking out into the cool night air. Together everything felt different but also somehow exactly the same. Over the next few weeks we navigated our new relationship with careful steps and open communication. We didn't tell our teammates right away, wanting to figure out our own feelings before dealing with outside reactions. But gradually we became more comfortable with small displays of affection around our friends, testing the waters to see how they would react. To our surprise and relief, most of our teammates were supportive. A few were awkward about it at first, but they came around when they saw how happy we were together. Our coach, a progressive woman in her 50s, was completely unfazed and told us that as long as our personal life didn't interfere with our performance on the court, she didn't care who we dated. Chris's family was a bigger challenge when he finally came out to them during spring break. The reaction was mixed. His mother was hurt that he had kept such a big secret from her, but she ultimately told him that she loved him no matter what. His father and brothers were less accepting, and Chris went through a difficult period of adjustment as he learned to navigate those changed relationships. My own family was wonderfully supportive. My parents had always liked Chris and they welcomed him into the family with open arms once they understood the nature of our relationship. My little sister Emma, who was 16 and much more worldly than I had been at her age, just rolled her eyes and said she had seen it coming for years. Our basketball performance improved dramatically once Chris was no longer distracted by his internal struggles. We went on a winning streak that lasted through the end of the regular season and carried us deep into the tournament. We didn't win the championship, but we came closer than anyone had expected. But more importantly, Chris seemed to find peace with himself. The angry, frustrated person he had been during that difficult period was replaced by someone who was confident and comfortable in his own skin. He smiled more, laughed more, and played with a joy that was infectious to everyone around him. As for me, I discovered that falling in love with my best friend was the most natural thing in the world. Every day brought new discoveries about Chris and about myself. I learned that he was ticklish behind his ears, that he sang off key in the shower, and that he made the best chocolate chip pancakes I had ever tasted. I learned that I loved the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, the way he absently played with my fingers when we were watching TV, and the way he always knew exactly what to say when I was having a bad day. 6 months after that night, the locker room, Chris and I were lying on the grass outside the student union, studying for finals. It was one of those perfect spring days that made me grateful to be alive and in college and in love. Chris was reading his sports psychology textbook while I worked through a set of calculus problems. Daniel, Chris said suddenly. I replied, without looking up from my homework, do you ever regret it taking this chance with me? I set down my pencil and turned to look at him. He was lying on his back, with his textbook balanced on his chest, squinting up at the sky through the branches of the oak tree we were sitting under. Never, I said firmly, not even for a second. Do you? Chris turned his head to look at me and his smile was radiant. Never, I just wanted to make sure you felt the same way. I do, I said, leaning over to kiss him softly. I love you, Chris Martinez. I love you too, Daniel Cooper, he replied. And I always will. As I settled back against the tree and returned to my homework, I reflected on how much my life had changed since that night in the locker room. I had discovered parts of myself I never knew existed, had learned to love someone in a way I never thought possible, and had found a happiness I never knew I was missing. Sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes love finds you when you're not looking for it, in a form you never anticipated, and sometimes the person who changes your life forever is the one who was standing right next to you all along. That losing game had led to the biggest win of our lives, finding each